forgive me if I sometimes need to speak in Chinese to communicate with my fellow.
Okay, just want to make sure I was.
好，大家好，然后我们欢迎来到这不知道第几期的 Moment 在线直播。然后这一期呢，我们很荣幸能够邀请到Otoy 公司的老板，也是 CEO Jules Urbach 来参加。Did I get your name right? Like the pronunciation?
Yeah, Jules Urbach.
Yeah, okay, right, that's great. Great, thank you. 然后我们很邀请到Jules 先生来参与我们这一期的电台。然后我之前已经在网上征集了一些大家相对来说比较感兴趣的问题，然后在电台后期呢，我会逐一发问。好，然后我们先开始植入话题。Some and Zario, do you have any questions first? Like if you want to start to ask anything?
I think I have asked about the payments or the Chinese support things. So
yeah, do you have any plans
guys,
to support Chinese market, because we have a very different habit of online payment, like compared to the rest of the world? Like,
yeah. So in that regard, we're looking at adding. We currently on the Octane shop page, you can use credit card through Stripe, and we're working with Stripe to add Alipay and WeChat. Hopefully both, but at least one of them, and hopefully before the end of the year.
Before the end of the year.
Oh.
That's our plan.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
awesome.
Nice.
How's
that going to work? Like, is that going to be a one-time payment per month, or because as far as I know, both Alipay and WeChat do not support subscription mode, right? So you have to allow users to buy per month or per year, something like that. Or how's it going to work?
So it's interesting because for us, it's handled through a third party, through Stripe, which handles our recurring payments. So we have them handle the recurring part. They handle the back end through Alipay. So it may be that, you're right. Maybe it's an issue that's going to stop monthly subscriptions from being, easy to do, but at least annual subscription should work. And certainly if you just want to purchase Octane, that'll work. But we're looking at it so that we can support everything that we do through credit cards on either Alipay or WeChat. And it's possible that Stripe does some of that lifting for us, so that it looks to us like we're getting a subscription or monthly thing, or they're handling it. And the truth is, we're still in the middle of that process. So we'll see. I think at the very least, an annual subscription wouldn't be a problem. In a lot of cases, users consider an annual subscription something that is not recurring. They just get an email reminder a year later, re-up if you want to continue using it, or continue your maintenance if you've purchased it full stop.
So you guys are still working on the details, right?
Yes, and we're working on that with Stripe, because it's a whole process through which an American company, or in our case, New Zealand, because we also, we're in New Zealand for Otoy, we have to do things to our shop page and all these other, changes to support the, WeChat and Alipay, and they're different. So we may get one and not the other, or one may support everything. And so that's why it's not done yet. And that's why it's also probably going to take a couple more months before we have it on there. But we are definitely working on it, and I'm motivated to make this happen as soon as possible.
We want to discuss the GTC event. It's obviously very exciting, for all people who are working in the industry, and especially when I was watching your presentation on YouTube. I feel like you talk about lots about upcoming new features, in 2 or 3, maybe 5 years. But you rarely talk about Octane itself. Do you have anything to share about the very soon future, let's say? Is there any update that people can expect?
Yes, and I think for sure. And there's actually, since Octane 4, which was now 2 years ago since we released that, we've moved to much faster release cycles. So we typically release 2 to 3 releases a year. In fact, Octane 2020.2 is Octane 9, and they're major releases. So earlier this year, we released Octane 2020.1, stable version, April. We've just now released Octane 2020.2. It'll be release candidate in about a week. And that adds a lot of new features that that are on the forums, and any user can now download the standalone and use it, and the plugins will follow. And some of those we showed at GTC that are actually so new that they didn't even drop in that release until, I guess, this coming week. We have a compositing system. People were asking for fast fog and things like that in Octane for a long time. Awesome. You can do that now with a compositor, taking the Z channel or position channel and and doing operations on it. And there's a lot of other things that are in that, even in this release, right? We have improved built-in scatter. In C40, we have Octane scatter, which has been excellent, but we want to improve it to support GPU, animation, and volumetric scattering. Some of that is coming into this release that's coming this month and is now out in beta. And the other major improvement is even in the last week, Octane 2020.2 has improved support on Ampere on the 3080s. So the 3080 on Octane 2020.1 was maybe 570 something Octane bench. And as of now, it's 602. So that's like a pretty big boost. And we think that even in the next, we're going to have probably yet another release after 2020.2 before the end of the year. It may be an experimental build, but in that release, we've already shown many of the things that we're working on that are very likely to be in users' hands. Boolean operations, where you can use shapes to clip other shapes volumetrically, that should make it in there. We are going to have even better Ampere support, which will support the hardware motion blur. And we may see even further speed ups on, just in general with RTX. There's also improved shading, because the speed that we're seeing in Octane in the last year, a lot of it comes from improved RTX core support in some scenes. But in order to improve everything, we also need to speed up the shading, the lighting, which has nothing to do with RTX or ray tracing hardware. And so in that regard, we have areas that can help. And one of those is AI light. We introduced that for better light sampling in Octane 4. And then, which is, I'm embarrassed to say, we only added area lights and point lights that were actual native, very fast, lights, light primitives this year. Before that, everything in Octane was a mesh light. And in any other renderer, mesh lights are very noisy. In Octane, it's actually the only option you ever had, and it was pretty good. But the interesting thing is with proper area light and point light and other light primitive supports, they're 4 times less noisy than the mesh lights, and that's what you would expect. And even better still, with the new AI light system, they'll be twice less noisy. And that just is going to make the whole render, get to a noisy result a lot faster. So that should be out before the end of this year. Boolean operations, improved Ampere support, RTX support, and a lot of other things. Custom AOVs should be out by the end of this year. We're working on that. We're halfway there. OpenColor IO, halfway done. Will be done by the end of the year. So those are things that are just in the next couple of months on our roadmap. And I think our priority has been, let's listen to users. Let's get a list of what everyone wants as quickly as we can, and deliver that every 4 months. So that means about 3 releases a year, which is kind of what we're on track for. So I think by the end of the year, with custom AOV support, good color OpenIO support, a lot of nodes that require OSL are going to be built in. And I've talked about that, right? And we're adding all the utility nodes that I think people may want. We can always add more, so that you don't need to learn OSL or use it to provide basic functionality such as state nodes and ray type and all of that. OSL will always be there. It's a great tool for advanced users, but I think artists that are just learning Octane or not familiar with coding, they want it to be simpler. So that's an important factor. And I think that with that, next year, in the first half of next year, we've outlined some of our goals in general for Octane. We're working on a new kernel called Progressive Photon Mapper that is designed to help with caustics. So caustics in Octane are pretty slow. Or unless you do a gobo, right? Unless you project caustics and you fake it. Or you use PMC, which is it's not efficient. So having very fast caustics is something that we think we could do with progressive photon mapping. It'll have the quality of PMC.
Progressive photon mapping, you said progressive. It's not.
Progressive photon mapping.
Oh,
so
that's
what it means, what it means is that it'll basically be doing 2 renders at once at the same time. You'll be rendering the caustics progressively, but it'll be applied onto the scene from the light source's position, so that it can speed it up. I mean, that's one of the approaches.
So it's unlike some other renderers where the photon paths need to be calculated first before anything else happens.
Yeah, no, this is going to be just like the normal progressive rendering.
Oh, that's very
it's always
nice.
been.
Yeah.
It'll just look like it's getting you caustics faster. So that's the idea. No, we're still not going as far as putting any sort of baking or pre-processing in Octane at all. That doesn't mean you won't be able to kind of play with that. I mean, we have, with that work, we also are looking at doing irradiance caching but not so much for Octane. Like that's where we can maybe talk a little bit about some of the other work we're doing. Irradiance caching is kind of useful for games. It's like baking, right? And we could leverage that. I think that Octane and just GPUs in general are getting fast enough to the point where that's not something we need to worry about for production rendering so much. And the reason why we're feeling stronger about this is that we look at the work we're doing with Brigade, and I'll get into that in a second. And we feel that, we can get really far with regressive path tracer that's designed with today's hardware in mind. I mean, Octane is amazing, but it's 10 years old. I mean, it was the first real GPU renderer out there, and it was built entirely for GPU. There's never been a good way to do it on CPU. It's never designed for that. And I think that, conversely, it's hard to take a CPU renderer like RenderMan, like Arnold, not impossible, but it's hard, and bring them over to GPU and get all the benefits of the GPU architecture. Because if the renderers weren't built for that to begin with, and you want pixel perfect, results between the CPU and GPU, it's difficult. And same with Octane. Like we built the CPU version, and it was way slower than Arnold, way slower than a CPU render, because it's just a different design. Now, what we're seeing in the future is we have RTX, we have ray tracing hardware, which is something we've been investigating before RTX. We were looking at that with Imagination Technologies had a ray tracing hardware chip that we were working with in 2016. And I think, when RTX first came out in 2018, well, we did improve Octane. Like Octane is a lot faster in a lot of scenes with RTX on. But what we decided to do, and we announced it then, is we felt that if we were to make a new engine and take everything from Octane that we could and take a couple of years to build it around RTX, maybe do it in Vulkan, maybe do it in a gaming engine language, we'd end up with something that's able to leverage the RTX hardware better. And that's what Brigade kind of is. Because we're not really going to replace Octane with Brigade. I don't think it makes sense, because there are things that Octane's doing that and the reason, and I'll get to why Brigade is faster. Brigade is obviously designed for RTX.
You can probably slow down a little bit, because I have lots of questions to ask you. You don't have to get into details.
Let me pause there and see if and let's have you ask another question so that I can make sure to answer your questions and not go off into the
Do you have any hardware recommendations if people want a butter smooth experience using Octane, especially the interactivity between IPR, or is there any tricks or settings that you want us to know in terms of the software settings, and in terms of the hardware, what kind of hardware is recommended for at this very time for today, let's say?
So I'll start with the hardware, because I think that's easy for me to recommend. I mean, a 3080 or 3090, depending on how much memory you need, you can't go wrong. The 3080, as I was saying before, 600 octane bench, you'd have to buy two 2080s to match that speed. And it's also, and more importantly, and people who have been using Octane on 3080, and I'm one of them, it's a lot faster in the IPR. It's really, really fast. So that even one GPU that's that fast, that's double the speed, means that the frame rate in the IPR is double the speed as well as final render. The reason to get a 3090, which is probably closer to 700 octane bench, is of course it has more memory, which is important. It also has NVLink, so if you get two of them, you can have 48 gigs of combined VRAM. And that's the main reason, is to get basically that other 20% speed and to get more memory. But for whatever, $700, which is what the 3080 is, incredible value. And I think those two cards are I would highly recommend it. It seems to me, I don't know if you can still get 2080s, right? I mean, maybe you can get them for cheaper, but it feels like you're not really utilizing the fact that one card is going to give you the speed of two, and two cards will give you the speed of four. And if you have limited space in your computer, why would you go for less? And in the case of one machine with two cards running 4 times the speed, the IPR is faster, the renders get done faster. And I think also for future developments, Brigade is going to run even faster and it does run faster on on Ampere, on the 3090s, than it does on the Turing. It's more than double. So I do recommend those two cards for Windows users and Linux users in particular. If you're on a Mac, there are not many choices, because we have the Mac Pro with AMD Vega 2s, and everything else Apple just basically builds in. So, but if you're on a PC and you're looking at NVIDIA cards,
thank you.
3080, 3090.
Nowadays nobody cares about Mac, so let's skip the Mac for now. But so 3090 would be the best choice for high-end users or professionals, right? And
that's the card I bought for myself. So yeah.
Okay, wow, that's really good to know. And I also noticed there's a slight difference between the 3080 and 3090 is the memory bus width. Like the 3080 has 320, I believe, bit of bus width, and the 39 has 384 bit bus width. Does that count a lot for the interactivity?
It's hard to say. I mean, I was surprised because I tried the 3090 before I tried the 3080 for various reasons. NVIDIA provided us different pieces of hardware. And I will say that it still feels like it's 20%. You know what I'm saying? It's not radically different. I mean, but it's noticeably different. I mean, 20% is still going from, whatever.
Like it's just
25 to 30 frames a second.
But not the interactivity, right, between the card.
I think the activity feels really nice on the 3090. So I mean, I haven't done, and yeah, I should, and somebody should probably do more measurements between the two. I will say that going between the 3080 and 3090, I have them on two different desks. It's not that big of a difference. They're both way faster than a 2080 Ti. So that's, I don't have a specific thing. I think the 3090 is the better choice if you're really doing scenes that could go out of core and want to have the fastest and want NVLink. Like that's a better investment. That's why, if you can afford it, it's the better card to get, I think.
So for some of the really rich guys who want to get full 3090, like full cards, is it going to work if we plug in two NVLinks to connect the full cards, like so we can have benefits of 48 gig of RAM for the scenes?
Yeah. So my understanding is that you basically, just like the 2080 Ti's. Well, actually, the thing though, we should check, because I think at one point it worked where you could have two cards or four cards each with NVLink, and each card had 48 gigs, and NVIDIA took that away. I think at one point, and I think they took it away, and I think they put it back. I mean, I don't know. That's the thing is, it is a very good question.
It's still a question that we don't know yet whether 4K is a good idea if they don't support two NVLinks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing is, somebody on one of the Slack channels had a 4-way 3090 thing, so we're going to see how that works. I think they do. I mean, I will find out, and I will share with you guys on one of the forums or Slack channels were posted. I think they do, but I'm not sure. And at one point, NVIDIA took that away as a feature, so that's something that it is a little iffy. Let's get to the bottom of that. I would find that kind of silly though for them not to support it. In theory, it should work. So
OK， 所以就现在如果想买4张3090的朋友，可能要缓一缓，因为如果你如果你打算用 NVLink 来两张卡连在一起的话，你4张卡用2个 NVLink 连之后，我们目前还不知道 Octane 或者是其他的类似支持 NVLink 的渲染器，他们支不支持这种状况，因为可能 NVIDIA 把这个功能给拿掉了。所以你最好就是对你想买4张卡的话，我建议你缓一缓，可以先买2张暂时用一下，再不行的话，你另外2张卡你再组一台电脑也是可以的嘛，对吧？就4张卡就是可以先缓一缓。Alright, thank you very much. Do you have any other tricks or suggestions about the software in terms of better fluent experience for interactivity between the software and IPR?
Yeah, well, I always go to 2x2 or 4x4 subsampling, which of course is a huge increase in speed. Subsampling, I turn off the denoiser when I don't need it for final render, because that also adds up to the speed. If I want the maximum speed, I go to I have my settings. Like if you look at my videos and I'm showing Octane, my sweet spot is sometimes I go to 4x4 subsampling, 32 minimum samples, 1024 by 512, because I just want to see the scene as fast as possible, as interactive as possible, with as many samples as possible. And 32 is the maximum you can throw at it. I also maximize the parallel samples. I sometimes put that all the way to the end on a newer card. That makes a difference. Depending on the size of the scene, that's why I also go to lower res for IPR stuff. Changing the maximum samples, right underneath parallel samples, you have that. It could be 64 or something. If you want very fast updates, you can set it lower, but it slows down the rendering. So probably keeping it in the middle is good. And direct lighting is it's faster. I mean, I find when I want to make a scene and I want to spend a lot of time in it and I want to get a good sense of it, I sometimes just go to direct lighting and I have AO. But even with path tracing, I mean, if you basically, turn off adaptive sampling, turn off denoiser, keep your AOVs to a minimum, do 0.5 megapixel, do 4x4 or 2x2 subsampling, but crank up the minimum samples, that will get you pretty fast results. And I do that all the time. That's my personal preference, because it gives me the closest I can get to the final scene as I move it around and doing it quickly. And Brigade is meant to, of course, take that to another level. But if you're doing it all within Octane today, those are the settings I use.
But you don't turn on the denoiser for a clear viewport feedback?
I do when I'm done with kind of moving things around, and it's like sometimes I keep it on, sometimes I keep it off. Depends on how much it slows it down. And it's not that much of a slowdown, but when you do turn it on, it does create sort of more buffers and all that. I think it depends also on the resolution that you have. I sometimes turn it on or off, but if I absolutely want the fastest speed and I want to move things around, and it doesn't need the denoiser, or the denoiser is not going to kick in until you're at hundreds of samples, right? And if I'm doing 32 samples per frame, I sometimes just keep it off. I mean, it truly probably isn't the thing that can affect the speed heavily, especially at lower resolutions. So yeah, that's not the as big of an issue as, like, let's say subsampling, which can of course increase the speed by 16 times interactively if you use that.
Okay.
So yeah.
So subsampling is the biggest takeaway here for you.
Huge for interactivity. You
Okay,
double.
I don't think many people
speed,
of us will ever actually use the subsampling features, right? 我们应该都没有打开过它那个呢。
没有开过。
Where is it?
什么东西啊？
you have to use it smartly. You have to use it with a high minimum number of samples, because if you set the minimum number of samples to 32, which would normally make the frames take a lot longer to update in the IPR, but then you turn on subsampling and you keep the resolution fairly low, you get a very good iPhone size, or it's kind of like a little bit less than 1024 by 512 render of the scene. And I like that, because as I'm changing lighting, like I don't need to have a high resolution. I want to see how the light bounces around and all that stuff. So that's why I use it.
就是 Octane
就那个 AI 是吧？
不是，它是有一个内置的功能在菜单里面，在 IPR 里面，就是可以降低分辨率渲染。就是它渲染的时候，它会直接降低它前面几次采样的那个分辨率，就是直接按照4倍或者是16倍来降低。然后你选择那个的话，
他说的这个那个 subsampling 应该就是那个 AI upsampling， 因为它里面有这样的选项。
不是那个，应该是 IPR 里面的，可能要打开看一下。Like the sampling you are talking about is not the AI denoisers. No, it's within the manual.
Yeah, and here's the thing with the subsampling is that if you just let go of the scene and you let it render, it'll go to full res, within a second. So it's only when you're moving the things around that it goes to subsampling at all. And that's why I like it, because when I let it go, if I want to see it just like at full res, then it goes to full res, and then if the denoiser's on, it'll kick in the denoiser. But that's the thing, is when you crank it minimum samples in the imager to 32, which is the maximum, it's a lot, and then turn on the subsampling, and then start moving lights around. And what I like about that is that at the right resolution, at the right settings, you start to see a 32 sample scene at 30 frames a second or something like that, and it's really cool. I use that setting for a lot of stuff, because the way that my vision works artistically, it gives me a very good sense of the scene very quickly. And so that's it. And it's been in Octane from the beginning. That's what I was doing in Octane even 10 years ago. But it's probably something that's artist preference, but I think if you haven't tried it, you should, because it is really good way to get a clear picture of the scene at lower res, but with high quality and with a lot of interactivity. And you can just let it, go to full res, even at 1024 by 512. That's still a decent, render of the scene, even at 0.5 megapixel. So that's the thing. And AI upsampling, totally separate thing from that. Probably not great to mix that together, but it's also a tool that you have to boost the resolution.
Do you have any plans to support the AI sampling for any other passes beside the beauty one? Because all other passes do not actually support AI the AI denoiser for now. And it's very problematic when dealing with any renders with alpha background, like with transparent or semi-transparent pixels. It struggles a lot.
So the AI sampler was originally to be a totally separate tool from Octane. We're just going to, and that's how we used it. We just take a PNG or take an image and it spits out four times larger one. We're probably going to, now that we have the compositor system in Octane, we're probably going to move the AI upsampler to that system. So you can take whatever you want, whatever pass you want, feed it there, and get out a image that's 3 to 4, 16 times larger basically, and do what you want with it. And that, I think, is the right approach, and the one I originally wanted to take with the AI upsampler. It doesn't really belong in the imager node the way it's in there. I mean, even the AI denoiser probably could be split from the imager, right? So AI upsampler, for sure, by the time we get to I'd say mid next year, is going to just be part of the post-processing node graph, because it doesn't have a place particularly in any other part. It's not exactly, for the beauty passes, you said it should be used anywhere. It could be used after you're done rendering. It could be used after you're done compositing. So it's really limiting the tool to have it in the way it is there. But we didn't have another better place to put it without building all that we've now built in Octane. So that's one of the reasons why it went into the imager node. Not my first choice, and definitely not where it's going to stay by the time we have proper, full AOV support and full compositing support in the coming weeks. So that I think is just like imager needs to be split out better. AI app sampler will also just go into that and let you do whatever you want with any image, any output.
Make sure that before you ask anyone to do a proper AI samplers or AI denoisers, make sure you ask them to finish the Bloom After Effects plugin first. Thank you.
Okay, got it. I've noted.
All right. Any more questions from guys?
And I have a last question is about the I was speak in Chinese to and I will 那个我跟你说中文嘛，就是可能也是要准确一点表达，就是我想大家最后总结一下，比如说基于目前的版本我们要让最大程度的降低它的崩溃的话，有什么好的建议？
这个很难就是因为很多崩溃其实是插件那边处理的，也不是。
对，但我觉得他今天说的这个有很棒，就是他说其实 out of core 是一个很关键的东西，那我们之前完全不知道有因为这个人会引起崩溃。所以我觉得可能是不是在这方面能再提供一些信息。
Okay, like do you have any suggestions or that experience that you can share to avoid any crashes like possible? For example, you mentioned that the out of core is actually not as stable as people would expect. Sometimes it will cause a crash for random reasons. And like if you can have any other similar experience or knowledge that you can share and people can learn, that would be great.
So, I collect everything that's reported so that I can kind of get a sense myself. And it feels like a lot of the things that sometimes can get messed up in C40 in particular is the texture previews, right? If we, clearing the texture cache is one of the things that apparently does make a big difference. Maybe less so in recent versions, but that was a huge problem. Like 30% of crashes we were seeing were from it. Were fixed when basically people cleared the texture cache. So that's one thing that I would just start. The other thing that's really, really, really important, and it's not limited just to Octane, but just in general, make sure that the drivers are the studio drivers. Typically, the latest studio drivers with Octane 2020 are typically going to give you the best experience. At least that's the way it is as of now. And that's a starting point for a lot of stuff. I mean, the things with out-of-core memory, that's really on us to fix and support better. I mean, there's limits that we have in Windows that we're going to work around to get it so that, we can allocate memory, and keep it reliably. But it still doesn't mean that if you're going lightly out of core and if textures are out of core, for example, which is not a big of a deal, those things, are better. It's when geometry is heavily out of core and we're paging gigabytes of extra memory and then that gets taken away that you might run into problems. But it's still, a difficult thing to predict, because if the memory is taken away from us and we don't have the notification from the system, that's bad. Now, we have partnered with Microsoft working on drivers, but it's not really something we need them to fix. We have a way to now do that through CUDA. And so I think hopefully within a few months, by the time we're in early next year, we'll have much better out-of-core memory support. And we're also going to support NVLink. We're going to do more with that. It's like, it's good, it works, but only for geometry. So we want to support more data types, all data types with NVLink. That's in progress as well.
Okay, cool. Any other questions? Like from you too?
Well, I was going to say, we haven't talked about Embergen or World Creator. Maybe we want to just talk a little bit about those for a bit, if you guys think.
Those I saw your announcement, but like, does it mean that people who have a legit subscription of Octane today, right now, at this moment, they can start to download the World Creator for free on the website?
So I think this week we'll be adding World Creator. We're trying to. We just did the first build that worked with our licensing system. So so that should be out this coming week, hopefully. Which again would say.
So does it mean like if it's happening within 1 or 2 weeks? So. Right.
Within 1 week, and it will be free for a month, and then afterwards we're going to have it as a discount subscription on the shop page. So it's just like the render slave is like $10 to get an extra render slave, because we don't need to give you a full license for new node if you already have Octane renderer. If you already have an Octane renderer subscription and you want to get other software like World Creator or the full version of Embergen, down the line, those things will be, very heavily discounted, and additional things you can add to your subscription. And we will also probably have one big subscription that has everything for a really discounted price.
Okay.
And even better, we'll have at some point next year, just like Brigade will be integrated, World Creator and Emergen will be inside of Octane Core as modules, so that you can use them in directly in CMO4D and other tools as well. So it's really cool.
所以就是
others
到
yeah.
所以就是到大家看到这个视频的时候，应该有这个 Octane 软件授权的人，应该已经可以到他们官网去正常下载，开始免费使用 World Creator 和 Emergen 了。Emergen 其实应该一直都可以用，对吧？
对，可以玩了，对，可以用。
Okay. All right. So Emergen, like, how's the what's the kind of the relationship between Otoy and other companies who supports the RNDR system, like World Creator or Emergen? You don't like technically acquire those companies, right? It's just like a deep relationship between the two, like business relationship.
Yeah, it's a deep relationship. I mean, so in the case of Emergen, it's a very long, exclusive arrangement for both sides, like, to have a source code level where we help them with the source code, we help
source code
it.
level collaboration.
Yeah, we our team. I mean, it's basically like having, even with an Otoy, we have different teams working on Brigade and Octane. The Emergen team is just, from our perspective, is one more team that is working with all of us. And even as we add like World Creator guys, I mean, everyone's very friendly with everyone else. But in the case of Emergen, which is the first third party we brought in, I felt that was the right place to start. But it is basically like, even though we're separate companies, we work in this case for Emergen Effects, we're really working as one team, and we're sharing everything we can, even with the with other partners. Like if we have a tool that cross compiles to Metal and Vulkan and CUDA, which we use for Octane X, we share that with the other partners so they can use that. We can share, and that's it. We want to create a better product on both ends, even if if it's something that goes into Octane independently or or World Creator outside of our store. But I think that it's a very close partnership, and it's designed so that we don't just sell the product on the shop page, but really build something that works really well together and allows others to come in and do the same. And that's something that I haven't really seen done before. I mean, maybe Photoshop plugins or After Effects plugins have a whole ecosystem, but I feel like having something where you can create a product like Emergen once, really nicely integrated inside of Octane and other renderers once, and then have it work everywhere, is pretty cool. And that's at the very least, that's what we need to do to get it working in C4D, Blender, and others. So that's the goal. And we're looking at specifically at adding partners at this level in these very close partnerships that work on GPU software, because that's our bread and butter. So if you look at World Creator, it's GPU based, Emergen GPU based, we're GPU guys. And if we add one or two more in the next year or so, it'll probably be similar. And we're also developing our own separate tools, like Sculptron is a GPU sculpting tool, which, again, is for a niche where we want to do temporal animated sculpting.
All of them are actually work like individual modules, right, within the system. So one thing that's been bugging me is that why don't you have any plans to split up just the post-production, or is specifically the Bloom module as an independent Photoshop or After Effects plugin? Because lots of people are crazy about the Octane renderer, mostly because of the good Bloom effect. Like if it can be used as an independent After Effects plugin, then I think lots of people would be really happy.
Yeah, and something, you're 100% right. So one of the things we're doing even in 2020.2 is we're starting to split up the whole imager node. I mean, you can feed anything you want into just imager and come out with whatever you want. You can even use the upsampler. It deserves to be its own little mini system, and we're working on it. I mean, we have an After Effects plugin. Hasn't been updated in a while, but maybe turning the imager system, or even a mini version of Octane that we can give out for free, one GPU, right? That has most of the imager stuff, that could be useful. And I'm thinking about that. I mean, I think we just need to do some other work on our side. And the priority right now is just to get the imager and the post-processing and the custom AOV work done in the next couple of months, so that it's just wrapped up. And I think that once that's in place, and even as we look at things like, we want to feed multi-render, we want to take Arnold and feed that into the Octane Bloom. We can also take anything and put it into the Octane Bloom. So therefore, if you want to separate that out or put that as its own thing, that is possible. I just want to do it in a way that's smart. So therefore, that you can take whatever it is you want to use within the stack and have one plugin, and if you just want the Bloom, it's really easy to use just that. But there's other things in there as well that may be of use, upsampling and other stuff. I mean, there may be things we can work on as well that are post effects, just like the current ones that are additive that we may also want to support. So the idea of having a better Photoshop or After Effects integration that is just focused on that part Makes sense. And to that end, one of the things we've looked at is building an OpenFX version around the whole of the Octane SDK and releasing that, so that would work in many different post-production tools, right?
Okay, but I highly, strongly suggest that you just right now to ask 1 or 2 developers to help split up the Bloom module and wrap it up as an independent effects plugin. I believe like there will be so many people will be happy and benefit from that alone. Like before you do anything better or try to make more feature sets or complete some high-level modules. Like it's something that we've asked that so many people have such a high demand that is such a popular idea that I don't think Otoy is currently aware. That maybe something that you can.
No, this is great feedback. So what your suggestion is, After Effects plugin or Photoshop plugin?
After Effects plugin. After Effects plugin. Just exclude the Bloom node alone and make it into a glow effect in After Effects, and make it work as a After Effects plugin, and I believe many will be happy.
So I have a question. Have you tried the current After Effects plugin that Ahmed created for Octane 3 that,
it's been a long time. Actually, I talked to Ahmed about it. I don't know if it actually has a Bloom module in it, but if it does. It does. Okay.
It has everything in it.
But does it actually?
Right? I think you might.
Does it work on any arbitrary layers, or it only works on the renderer results within the Octane scene?
The answer is it can work on any arbitrary layer, because we've already done a funky thing when we did the halftone OSL filter that takes whatever you're doing in Octane and feeds it into the render buffer and goes through the imager node. So.
But it's built a simple macro that does. It's not 2020, I believe.
Yeah, so we could update it. We could update it to 2020 and make it sort of simple to plug in your video layer. And
from my past experience working as a CG journalist, I personally don't think a renderer in a compositing software is that useful. And what we mostly need is just the Bloom itself. So it'd be great if the Bloom itself can be an independent.
One click, right? One click, take your layer and do that. I think
that's the idea. That's the idea.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. I mean, I think that's actually almost a done thing. I mean, may need to look at it, because we could update the After Effects plugin to make it just that, or make it super simple.
Yeah, just make it that. Just make it that, and make it happen before the end of the year, please.
Okay. I will take that as a number one feature request. Okay, that's good feedback though. I will definitely see what I can do and talk to Ahmed about it. We're not sure exactly where to take the After Effects plugin ourselves. Like one reason why it's sort of been in a state that it's in for years, but that could be an interesting option. And we also of course have Octane for Nuke, which is, I know Nuke is an After Effects, but it's fully featured and updated to 2020 as well. Okay, that's a really good piece of feedback and probably actionable. I'll talk to Ahmed about it and see what we can do there.
All right, nice. Any more other questions or things that you want to ask?
Yeah, I have a little question about the hardware. I mean, because I'm using like 4 cards, video cards for Octane, and but sometimes the CPU don't have enough like PCIe paths. So I mean, is it very different? Like if the CPU has a very low PCIe path, but I connect to like four cards, if you slow down the render time, or it's the same?
It really, it shouldn't slow down the render time, and that's why you have an Octane bench. You can see people with 20 GPUs getting 20 times the speed. What it will slow down is sending the data to the GPU. So if you're loading scenes, you're changing things, it's going to have to. It might be slower to go through, to send a texture, for example, to the 4 cards if it's on a slower lane. But once it's loaded in memory, I've had 8 GPU machines here, and it's 8 times faster, and that's how it should be, even in the IPR.
So the PCIe accounts actually is responsible for the data transferring between the computer memory and the VRAM, but it's not going to affect the render time itself, right?
No. Now there is an exception to that, which of course, if you're using out of core, then that might make a difference. But it's like if you can keep everything in memory, and your scene is in memory, you're probably not going to have any speed hit from the PCIe lane being slower or faster once it's in memory and it's on the device.
Yeah, that's really good.
So
to know.
if we want like a more a good interactive, like to move the things more fast, it will count in PCIe, right?
Only for changes to the data. If you're loading new textures, loading new geometry, yes.
Okay.
If your scene is 8K, if you're doing 8K renders in general, that's also going to be a challenge for real time. But if you're also sending a lot of AOVs and all that stuff, that might also cause more data to come back and forth. But you can also change the tile size for Octane to keep it fast. Okay. But yeah, I mean, if you're not sending new assets to the scene to be rendered, if you're just moving things around or moving the camera around, or changing materials or shaders or lights, it should be full speed, regardless of what your PCI express bandwidth at normal resolutions with a normal amount of AOVs.
Okay, that's a really good answer.
Wow.
所以就是我们选配硬件的时候，其实 PCIe 就是通道数，我们只要它还是重要，就是当场景传输数据到显卡的时候会比较重要，但是。直接如果你只是
全部捞到那个显存里，
对，全部都捞到显存里去的话，对它的实际上不会对渲染速度造成影响，并且如果你只是拖动改场景的大小啊或者位置的话，它其实也不会受到影响，因为它数量很少嘛，就是换位置的话。So talking about the GTC, like there's another big thing that you announced in the video is that the multi-render, like you also mentioned that the multi-render is going to support Brigade and the MPR anime renderer, which is the new like non-photorealistic renderer for cartoon, etc. Yep. And does it means that the multi-render will postpone the rollout of Brigade and anime renderer? Or
no. In fact, I mean, the problem is that I think we have certain renderers that are in different degrees of development. So, you know, and I know you guys want to talk about Brigade, which we should, but multi-render is actually, you know, the Brigade went through many different iterations. If you look at the history of Brigade, we said we shipped Brigade in Octane 4. And what that meant was that we took all of Brigade's scene graph changes, the fast scene graphs, and we put that into Octane and then added the shading of Octane in there. What we left behind was the was the faster shading of Brigade, which was less quality than Octane. But so Brigade is the reason why Brigade needs to wait for multi-render is we could do two things. We could basically ship Brigade as yet another plugin. I mean, like Corona and V-Ray, right? You have two different products, and we could build a new C40 plugin. We could do all these things. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, we already have 20 integrated plugins, and the C40 plugin in particular is in really good shape. So really what we wanted to do was just make it so that, at least for Brigade, we could have it so that we didn't have to have it be separate. I mean, if you have Octane and you just want to switch to Brigade or Octane,
yeah, just like another render kernel, like PMC.
Exactly, and we tried to make it a render kernel at the beginning. Like Brigade was not always meant to be a separate renderer, and it turned out to be too hard because all of the things that make Brigade fast, they're not just in the shading. It's a lot of it is how we handle geometry. A lot of it is it's just too different. So that's why it ended up kind of a year ago turning into its own renderer with its own format for geometry. I mean, behind the scenes, you may not know what's going on. So multi-render was like, it came out of that. Like we know that we have to basically have a way for Octane itself to essentially split itself into another system that can render inside of Octane and not use Octane at all. So once we started on that work for Brigade, then it was very clear that like, well, this could be useful for other things. We have another piece of technology that we've had for 2 years. I showed the anime renderer also as a kernel about 2 years ago. And the reason why it never made it into Octane is it's a lot of work to bring things into Octane and not break everything. And for something where you just want to render edges and MPR, it's almost like a domain-specific renderer. So it actually also ended up being its own renderer. It's built on RTX, just like Brigade. It's not using any parts of Octane. It's its own separate thing. So multi-render currently is able to load you know, essentially we added support for Hydra render delegates, just like Houdini Solaris is able to load different renderers. Octane Core cannot do that. And it's the same technology that we were using to load Brigade, but we've expanded it so it can support any Hydra render delegate. And anime render, we turned into a Hydra render delegate. So with just those pieces being done, and multi-render is pretty far along, we can now load the anime renderer into Octane and it switches very fast. And Brigade will too. Brigade just isn't that far along.
The question is, we don't need to wait for the multi-render to be implemented before we can use Brigade. Brigade will roll out earlier than the multi-render, right? Or... I
think that they're going to be probably all concurrent because multi-render is something we're going to probably start testing in the next four months or so. Brigade may be, what we could do with Brigade is have a standalone, I mean, we have now, when we show Brigade, if you guys look at it, it's you know, IMGUI is the interface. It's not inside of Octane. It's a separate application that launches, loads an Orbex file, and renders it. So the integration of Brigade and Octane is multi-render. I mean, that's the work that needs to be done. So when multi-render is done, Brigade will just work in there. And what we could do, and we thought about doing this before multi-render, is maybe put out a standalone Brigade thing that can load a file or do it, let people play with it. And I mentioned that in the video for GTC, but it's also, I kind of want to see the features finished. So we should maybe talk about Brigade, because I know there's a lot of questions on that.
Yep.
I can talk a little bit more about anime render. It is RTX only. It's just like Brigade is built for that. It's super fast, real time, does amazing ray traced edges. And with multi-render, at the very least, both Brigade, Octane, anything else we add, you can deposit that back in with Cryptomats, with Octane itself. So you can do whatever you want right within the IPR, which is really cool, or final render.
We don't expect people to be able to use the Brigade and anime render anytime earlier than the June of 2021.
I think June 2021 is the latest. Anime render maybe is kind of done. So the thing is, with multi-render support, we could roll out multi-render early next year with anime render and even with Arnold and some other things. So I think multi-render is actually a little bit further than people might assume from what I was showing. I mean, it's something that's been in active development for a while. But I think the renders themselves are the key, right? So anime render is very close, I think.
It's feature complete, like the anime render.
It's feature complete for tri-meshes, which, I mean, how we render a volume in there, do it in Octane, composite it, but for tri-meshes, which is the most thing you use for, it's really far along. And you can use it already in Houdini Solaris. Like, you can load it as a render delegate without Octane, without anything in Solaris. It's a render delegate, which is really cool. So it works independently in that way.
Can we actually use the Houdini plugin to use the anime renderer now?
Yeah, we could ship that in 2 weeks. And if you think that's something to... If people want to try it, we can do it. So that's
it'd be great. But like for other DCCs that do not have the
multi-render is exactly. So multi-render is for every DCC, and it also gives us channels like maybe Solaris misses things.
It's like the replacement. It's like the replacement of the Hydra delegate for other DCCs.
Exactly. It makes every DCC have the ability to load any hybrid render delegate. So which is how we load in Arnold.
Okay, that's nice. If that's the plan, then I think I understand how it works. And if that's the case, like, when is do you think is the appropriate time to roll out a first, like, even the alpha version or early beta version of Brigade to users to test, to play with?
So I think that the best case scenario is middle of December, because the drivers that we need from NVIDIA,
middle of December this year.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there's a window, because the question is, do we ship it? I mean, we can't really ship much of anything right now, because what we're using to develop it is not in the public drivers. Like, we've asked NVIDIA for this, that, just like we have with other even things in Octane that just come to us before they get into the public driver. So the drivers that Brigade's running on Vulkan on PC, and the Vulkan drivers that we need to run it on at all aren't coming out until sometime in December. So that would be the soonest we could put anything out. So from my perspective, so that's the minimum date. I mean, the reality is, probably middle of next year is when Brigade in a form that I think would be productizable would be out. So I think that gives people sort of an estimate of where we're looking at. And frankly, there's a lot of work to be done. So my thinking is, December, what do we have? We don't necessarily have the multi-render piece done yet. We don't have hair. We don't have, there's things that are just missing. But I think
you can still roll out as an independent app.
Yeah. So we may do it. So I think that's the question is, what value does that get other than satisfy people's curiosity, or can it be useful for things? Like, that's where maybe it doesn't have to be more than just, well, here, play with this and load a scene and see how it runs. Because I'm telling you, trying out those scenes as I did in those videos, it's pretty amazing. Like, it gives you already a sense of what you can do. You can, look dev is instantaneous. And we should talk about Brigade, just the technology and what its aims are and how it works, because I think that's a pretty important part of why it exists, right? And why it's not Octane. So maybe we can dive into that if you feel that's a good topic, where I can pause here and let you guys
I watched all your demos, like posting on either Facebook or Twitter, and I feel like in some of the scenes, maybe you apply a different LUT on top of it, but I kind of feel like the quality of the global illumination is still not as good, like not as perfect as Octane in some ways. Is it based on some sort of a special global illumination algorithm?
Well, no, it's not. It's doing brute force. So that's the thing, is we could.
It's brute force. So it's not. But when you move the lights, or when you move the objects around the scene, I see some of the delays or shadows moving along with objects. It feels more like a temporal integration of GI samples baked on object. It's not, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, there is definitely the equivalent of hot pixel on there. I mean, and you can, just like in Octane, remember before we had the ID noiser, hot pixel was all you had in the IPR to get rid of fireflies and things like that. So we have various different filters and post effects that can you run on Brigade to, one, make it look nicer, but two, also I mean, we do have hot pixels in Brigade. Like, they have the same thing that Octane does. The one thing, so let me go backwards to the beginning of what we have with Brigade and what I showed even in the earliest phases of 2018 or 2019. Because a little bit like Octane, there's, Brigade has multiple kernels itself. Like, we have info channels, we have direct lighting, and none of that really matters. Like, I showed that at the very beginning, because info channels are like, it's just perfect. Like, AO is like 4K 60, it's no big deal. Direct lighting, when you just have no GI or it's just ambient occlusion mixed in, it's also pretty fast. I mean, you have very little noise, and that was trivial. And we had that working pretty much last year. So the path tracing kernel in Brigade, which was designed to be a full path tracing kernel without AO, without direct lighting, without any sort of pre-computation, it's just basically very fast path tracing, and it's not perfect, and it does have and it is progressive, so that, like, if you actually let it settle, it'll get better quality. And the question is, what happens when you're going at 60 frames a second? And there is there is this thing where, and you'll see it in the Brigade videos, like, if you're going below 30, it'll basically do space warping. Like in VR, where you have temporal space warping or whatever, it'll basically take the depth map and reproject. You have that only to deal with to get rid of judder, if you can. And sometimes I turn that off because I actually think it's not that helpful. And you see that in the one video in the GTC talk, where it's like mesh lights and nothing else. This is the worst case scenario, even for Octane, definitely for Brigade. And in order to get it at high quality, I have to lower the frame rate down to get it. It's like 10 frames a second or something to get enough samples to make it look good. So the whole point of it is, it's either way, no matter what part of where you're looking at it from relative to Octane, it is a lot faster. The tracing, the scene changes, everything is just absolutely, it's a game speed basically. And the shading, while it's doing path tracing, it's doing it with a lot less code than Octane is, and it's doing it with a lot less complexity. So the scenes that work well with this, outdoor lighting, for example, I mean, they already look, I have trouble kind of really seeing a major difference. Like the Japanese garden's a good example. It looks about the same to me between Octane and Brigade. Now, granted, you don't have spectral rendering, so reflections of metals look different, even on the truck scene. There are things like that. Like Brigade is an RGB renderer, like most of the renderers out there, but it is still a full path tracer. It can still do all the things that ray trace path tracer can do. And that already makes it different than like Unreal Engine with, ray tracing, or anything with, any sort of DirectX with ray tracing. Those are a totally different approach, still valid, but Brigade is meant to be a lot more like Octane than Unreal Engine. And I think the path for us is, what if we were to rebuild Octane and get to Octane quality, but start with the fastest possible speed we could? And one of the changes or things that we decided to do is like, well, let's make it so that Brigade doesn't always have to run at 60, or doesn't always have to be noise free. Because if we try to make that the absolute perfection thing, as if it were running for a game, it's actually going to take away some of the things we could do for quality. And most people, I think, will end up using Brigade to get basically practically near time rendering like EV, but at Octane quality in C4D, for example. So we want to make sure that works. And then we'll figure out how to do like maybe other modes where you can run it at 60 always, and it'll figure out how to get it. So I
don't think anybody who's using Brigade will expect like 60 FPX. It's
yeah,
pointless.
And you don't need it. I mean, it's pointless. I mean, it's nice, but it's also not really what it's for. And I think people confuse that. We're like, well, because Brigade was initially for game. When we first started that render and that separately from Octane, it was designed for games. It was designed for Unreal and Unity, and it still could be used for that. But I think that with ray trace hardware inside of games, you don't necessarily absolutely need to go to Brigade. Brigade is, as I said, it's meant to be Octane quality to the best that we can deliver that, and still have it be, and in a lot of cases, 10 times faster, maybe more than that when you're dealing with.
And the shading system is going to be slightly different or somewhat incompatible to some of the feature sets of Octane.
Yeah, well, yes and no. So here's the thing: we're just starting on the process of doing the material conversion, and we do support. I mean, the idea is that you stick with Octane materials, but some things may not work. And I gave an example in the video, like layered materials.
So some of the nodes or features will be converted under the table, like to Brigade.
Yeah, and an example is very similar to what you have with direct lighting. When you switch between path tracing and direct lighting, sure, the same materials thing, but things are different. Subsurface scattering works differently, and things like that are different. So, it is one of those things where we have to do different things in different cases. One thing we definitely want to try to figure out, though, is that basically all the core noises and even OSL and things like that, those should work fine. In Brigade, it'll probably take a couple more steps, but that's in progress. I think it's more like if you have layered materials, for example, like, do we really, if we add that to Brigade, it could slow it down a lot. And that's one of the choices we made along with cutting off spectral rendering to keep this thing at 10 times the speed,
I asked a few friends and they both agree that we don't actually need any highly complicated or sophisticated shader supports in Brigade. All we need for Brigade is that as long as it runs as fast as the demo, we can always just compensate with PBR textures. We don't expect any complicated multi-layer BRDF or complicated shaders supported by Brigade.
Yeah, by the way, it is using Octane's universal material, and that's
cool.
what all those things. So nothing, it's not a different material. It's that, and of course we're also adapting Arnold standard surface in Octane, so that will eventually
most of my
become our
friends
universal material.
Just they look forward to use it as soon as possible without full support of feature sets. We don't really need to support lots of things, and we can still benefit from it for lots of projects.
Yeah. So the one thing that we had, we showed very early in the year, the interior scenes with lights and stuff. And one thing that Brigade is really, really, really focused on is when you create the procedural lights, the ones that we, Spectron, right? The quad and the spheres and those ones, those primitives were just added into Octane, but they're really important to Brigade because those, unlike mesh lights, gives you noise-free, instant, perfect lighting. It's amazing. So those we just put back into Brigade. We took them after 6 months, we improved it. So it was limited to a few lights. Now it's unlimited. And that's going back in. That's a big deal. That works nicely with mesh lights. And after that, really, we're focusing on materials, improving SSS, things like that. And I think maybe at that point, with this way to sort of export your scene loaded in Brigade, even a standalone tool might be interesting for, if that makes sense in later this year or early next year. But that's even if that's what we put out first, the real goal is this goes inside multi-render as soon as possible. And that I think is not going to take more than a couple of months once Brigade itself is ready for that step, I think.
Okay, another question, about OSL, as we know, Octane is the first renderer that supports OSL on GPU, right? But it's been a really long time since we see any updates on OSL, especially the closure support. Is there any plan that you will support the closure part of the OSL? And is there any plan to support Material X definition from IRM? And I've recorded from several ago that the MDL support by MDL material by NVIDIA is actually on the roadmap, but is that something that's going to happen anytime soon? Is that something down the line?
Great questions. And I will. We have things on our roadmap from 2018, like polarization and fluorescence that still have made it into
I personally, I actually skipped 18 and 19. And I just jumped from 4 to 2020 because I've heard the other two versions are not very stable.
Yeah, which is great because we have 2 years of updates. So the thing with all those things is I'll start with Material X. Material X is critical. We are actually supporting USD as a core proxy and material type geometry scene type inside of the core of Octane. So you'll be able to put a USD file inside of an Orbex, load it, export it. It's like we're replacing a Leanbic and all those things that were in the core of Octane with USD. And USD doesn't really have a material system, but Material X and USD together is actually very powerful. So for us to load MATX files and convert those into scenes that we can use, very important, probably also going in line with the Arnold standard surface support. So Material X for sure is on the roadmap. There are many different backends for Material X. There's a full OSL closure backend. There's a GLSL backend. There's always we can kind of ingest Material X. And of course, since Material X does have OSL for textures and patterns, we have no problem supporting those. Those I think already all compile. OSL closures, believe it or not, we had that done in 2016 or 15, and we actually had a version of Octane 3.1 that never was released that had OSL closure support. So the reason why we didn't put it out there at the time, and it's different now, is that we felt at least GPUs and CUDA at the time would have made the material compiling too slow when you link closures together. Not a problem for the textures, and in the end of the day, we did the work and we held it back. And part of that was because I didn't want to make Octane slower during scene creation. Like it was actually like taking seconds to relink materials. And I felt that was a no-go. If we were to do the same work today, and with Redshift, for example, they're doing OSL closures. If you download the optics version of NVIDIA's version of OSL, they have OSL closures there. But I think that we could add that back in there. And the reason why I think it would work fine is that basically behind the scenes, the layered materials are essentially doing exactly that. And out of people's requests for OSL in general, OSL closures haven't really been at the top of the list. Like it's important to us, and it's definitely important for next year. I just don't know whether that comes ahead of other things. So that's the thing, is like we want to get feedback from users. Do you want OSL closures in there sooner than, I don't know, Material X support, or an MDL is probably in the scheme of things, is probably the third on the list in terms of material, things out there. Like we would rather get Arnold standard surface support integrated ahead of all those other things, because that I think is much more valuable and also kind of important anyway, because either way, if you're doing OSL closures, you still have to kind of agree on the BRDFs and things like that. And ultimately they're all important, but I think the order in our book is let's finish up, the full, Arnold support, including, standard surface and all the Arnold nodes. We want to make sure we just have parity there. OSL closures, and Material X are probably about the same level of.
So if I understand, if I can understand it this way, that the closures and the MDL won't be anytime available within next year, maybe.
Next year is definitely a possibility. I think it's not likely before this spring. We're probably not going to get it in there before April, to be honest. It could change. I think if somebody listening to this podcast really feels strongly about MDL or OSL closures, let us know, because we can make it happen. It's just, we're trying to figure out what matters the most in the next 4 to 5 months after we're done with 2020.2. And I just don't know if that's the top of the list, but if it is, even from your perspective, I'd love to hear that, because that's what helps make the product better. It is just a waiting system of what do we focus on first. I think that, the better bet is that the release after April, like, the next one after that would be in mid-year, could definitely have that in there. And I think if everything else is where we wanted to be, then that would make a lot of sense. And that doesn't mean we can't get Material X in there a lot sooner. Like Material X is actually not that much work. So
talking about that, I kind of think recall that in the standalone app, like there's actually two different, if I remember correctly, there are actually two different type of floating numbers point or floating point. No, because when I was using, like everyone phrased Cinema 4D's Octane experience, because the ARMAC, the developer, rewrap lots of nodes into a more simple form, and it's been some of the reasons that why I don't really like the Octane in Houdini, because like you have to connect like RGB nodes or floating nodes to change lots of most basic things for lots of shaders, which is people shouldn't really need to do that. They should be building to the node by themselves. But like in the software, like they're actually one of if you use the Cinema 4D version of the Octane, you will see that there's actually a floating point number, but under the table is actually using the RGB node with a same value for the three elements of the vector, because lots of nodes that they have such a strict requirement for the data type for input and output. Like there's no auto data type conversion, which is a bit annoying, like, because sometimes if I chose the wrong node, if I want to use a flow node and use it to control a color, then it's impossible to do, and vice versa. So do you have any plans to solve this kind of issue, to do like including data type conversions or data type or not just conversion nodes, but also auto conversion and more data type structures like matrix or vectors, or for example vectors to flow or flow to vectors? Is that going to be anytime? Is it a problem that's going to be solved soon, or we have to wait for another long time?
No, I think that's a more, anything that you can express in the core data types and that kind of stuff that's being done behind the scenes at C4D is something that's a lot easier to bring into the core of the engine, and is something we're looking at. I mean, utility nodes are kind of the first step of why is this in LiveDB? This should be, everyone agrees at this point, this should have been in native nodes for the longest time. We were depending on OSL and people sort of. The next step, one of the things we are doing is there's something that you may have noticed where Universal Camera just came out of nowhere. That actually is a crazy node. It's built in standalone as OSL cameras with script nodes. And even things like the modules we're doing for scatter and stuff, I mean, there are things that you could build in standalone that give you all of that. I mean, everything that Ahmed's doing in this Heap4D plugin, you could express as a script node and build that into standalone. And what we've done is we actually have teams building these things and then taking that and wrapping them into the core of the engine. And that's where things like geometric primitives or universal camera, which turned out to be the most popular one of those, sort of, macro nodes.
Yeah, it'd be
came
great
to be.
if you can slow down a little bit.
Yes, so the idea is you can build macros for almost everything that you're looking to do, including conversions in standalone with scripting and with shaders. What we intend to do is to build a library of those. We've done a huge amount already, and add those to the built-in utility nodes. So they're just there in the core, and nobody really does, as I said, nobody cares whether they're, how they're created or how they work, but that is one of the ways that we're gonna be adding, for example, scalar math nodes. That's like not something that's in the node graph right now, but we have a math node that does all of that, and it's separate from the texture one. I mean, you can have both, right? So those kinds of things are in progress, and we're actively developing more of those. We can even do those in between releases if we're missing something. So that's how we're looking at adding a lot more functional nodes beyond just the utility nodes that are currently slated from LivePB. And one of those includes all bunch of scalar, vector, float operations on scalar, numbers right in the node graph.
And I have a question, and it's about because when using the Octane, I find that there is not sometimes the render time is very fast, but it will take a long time to load things when I press the render button. So sometimes it will take a very long time to wait. So I want to ask, like, how is the function? What is it doing when he load the things or something before it starts to render?
Well, that is, it depends on the scene. It depends on, textures. I mean, so in other words, my assumption, just based on what you're saying, is that you have nothing in the GPU and you have the scene loaded, and then you want to hit render. So for that to happen, Cinema 4D has to send us all the textures. We have to take the geometry and we have to load it into Octane's, into Octane's memory pool on the graphics card. And depending on how much that is, that could take a while. It shouldn't be that long though. And we did do major speed ups in Octane Core.
It's actually probably a bug, because I have this once where I was working on a really, really simple scene with very few polygons, like just less than a few 100,000 or something like that. It shouldn't really be a problem, but it takes an enormous long time to load in the memory and very slow to render. And eventually I found out that it has something to do with the AI light. If I turn on the AI lights, then the loading time and the render time will be significantly faster.
And this is in Octane 2020?
Yeah, I think it's some really early version of 2020.
Yeah, I'm using the 2020.
Yeah, it could be a bug. AI Lights is a, and there's two flags, right? AI Light, it turns it on, and then AI Light Update actually tracks the scene as you're changing it to make sure that it recalculates how to sample those lights. So, I've also noticed that it has, if you want full absolute best interactive performance, maybe AI Lights is a little bit slower, but it also gives you a lot less noise. And it is, but it's a bug. It should not slow down the scene that much. I mean, that is something I've seen when Octane was bugged, and I reported it myself to the devs and had them fix it. So it should not be slowing your scene down to a crawl by just turning on AI lights, especially if you don't have update AI lights turned on. The reason that other flag is there is so that you can move the scene around and not have to have it go slower while it's recalculating. But even so, just turning on AI lights for one frame to load the scene, it shouldn't create an issue like that. So it does sound like it's a bug to me. It is not normal. It doesn't sound normal at all that it would take a long time to load. We can load massive, multi-gigabyte scenes into filling up VRAM in very short order, and it works. So it feels like something else is going on, and maybe it is AI lights. Maybe Lewis is right. There's something there that we could be looking at. I've seen that bug, but I was almost certain it was fixed. So if it's not, let's figure it out.
Okay. And I want to ask, when we use in the future we use the Brigade, you just still need test sometimes a time to load the scene, or it will be immediately very interactive.
Well, it's definitely faster. It'll still take time because you're dealing with the same things that you'd load into any render. You have to take the textures, you have to take the geometry. One thing that it'll do probably better is that it'll compile geometry faster. But here's the thing: is that even in Octane, you can save textures as compressed textures, and they go right from the disk into the GPU, and they're instantaneous, other than transfer time. And Brigade will probably work a lot like that, where the idea is that you can, it's really just a question of getting the data to the graphics card, and once it's there or even loaded in CPU memory, it'll work. We have added one function in Brigade where it caches the entire scene, so that if you just load it again, and this is of course in the standalone, it is like a proxy. It just loads it again as fast as possible. But that's not necessarily going to be ideal when you're in the middle of C4D changing things all the time. But it might be good for proxies, and it is something that's much faster than Octane, where you save an ORBX and load it back in. It's still kind of it's slow, and we want to make that faster. But Brigade already has that, and Brigade also will support the DXR IO, the fast IO from SSD directly to GPU. We're working on supporting that as well, just like UE5 does, so that you can just stream data right from the disk or right from the network storage into GPU memory. That's something we'll probably also add to Octane, but we're testing it first in Brigade.
I've just checked the forum before the talk, and I saw that it was promised in one of the posts, one of the updated posts in the forum, saying that there are going to be a series of new features that are going to be included in the 2020.2 XP2, something like that, but they're not included to XP3, which was released a couple of days ago, I believe. For example, the rate type, or the utility node, or the RGB channel node, or math node, and color operators nodes. Do you have an estimation of when we can actually use that?
100%, great question. So I remember I was saying that there's things even like the post-processing nodes that are not in there. So XP4 adds a couple of major things that we're missing. It adds the compositor nodes, and it adds the scatter nodes that were in the release post. And then within a week, we should be hopefully at RC1, which will add all the utility nodes, rate type. I mean, everything that's in that utility LiveDB section will be in there. We're building that in, and that'll include the RGB channel splitters, rate type, state node.
Will we see these features next month, within next month?
Oh, I mean, it should be next week, but
next week. Okay.
That's yes. So it'll be in the final version of 2020.2, which will be released next month. But the release candidate where we lock the features are done, should be the end of this month, which is 10 days away. So that's the timetable that we're on there. And yeah, we were hoping to get everything in XP2, but like with life, it just had to be pushed to XP4, and then we'll probably go right from there to RC1 with the utility nodes built in. So the developer that's working on that is doing that this week. And this next release, which I think is either going out in the next day or so, I just got a copy of it, has a lot of major pieces. It has the full compositing, custom AOV compositor system. It's not a full custom AOV. It allows you to create, different compositing passes, which is still very helpful.
But the AOVs are still based on the render passes. They're not like the custom AOV from the shader.
No. So the custom AOV from the shader is coming in the release after 2020.2, which hopefully will be at XP1 the end of this year. That's what I was mentioning when I said custom AOVs.
Before the end of this year? Before?
Yes, it's before the end of this year.
Okay, that's glad to hear.
In the next year. Yeah, well, we know that. So it's the number one requested feature is proper custom AOVs. So it's just, yeah, as I said, it's one of those things where we should have done area lights and point lights sooner than this year, and we should have done custom AOVs sooner than this year. And that's the thing is, with that product, we've done a lot of things right, but not everything has been a perfect, prioritization. And so one of the things that we started to do really, I think, last year and continue to do this year is trying to really get a sense of what's the most important, have users, actively, tell us what's missing. And the custom AOVs have been at the top for a while, but we wanted to do it right. So it's been a 2020 priority to get it out there this year. And same thing with OpenColor IO and some other things. And so, yeah, we will have the ability to create custom AOVs from shaders and even process them with OSL filters in the release that'll probably be at XP1 before the year is out. That's our plan, and it's looking pretty good. I mean, I talk to the team, every day about our where we're at, and I think that we're looking pretty good for the end of this year on that. I would be surprised if that slipped. So I think it's a safe bet to assume that will be in the release after 2020.2 XP1. Boolean operations, the better AI light filtering, and some other things. Those are all pretty far enough along that they'll make for a great release for that first XP1, before the year is out.
And you also mentioned that the full ASIC support, the OCIO support is going to be is also going to arrive before the end of this year, like proper matrix transformation from input color space to output devices, etc.
Yes, so we have a dedicated developer, Carl, who I think you may have even seen on some of the Slack channels, who's working on that. And we did this in 3 parts. We introduced very beginnings of OpenColor IO in 2020.1. We added more in 2020.2, and the release after that will have hopefully everything that's left. And we've also been working on making it so that the viewport can support it, so you can do it in the within the viewport that Octane can hopefully support in the DCC. But as you guys are probably familiar, there's also a lot of things missing from various host apps. Like I don't think Cinema 4D to this day has all the proper support for OpenColor IO.
No. I don't even think the developer know what ACES is. Like they even they actually asked about the same question on like Reddit before, like what is ACES, or inside their official forum. So it's kind of a bit weird, I think.
So we've taken the approach of, we're not experts either. I mean, in-house, Carl has been learning about it for the last 18 months, as we've been preparing to build this feature out, and he's been asking our users, and we've had some experts in ACES that have been giving us feedback. And, like we thought we were doing the right thing by not putting ACES CG in the 2020.1 release. And, because we just followed the spec. And then, of course, everyone was like, wait a minute, ACCG is all we use. Like, that's what everyone uses. So, of course, like that went into 2020.2. And we're lucky because Octane being a spectral renderer, like lights are already, they don't need to go through an OpenColor IO transform or anything like that, or any sort of transform to be correct for ACES. It works because they're spectral light sources. But textures, we have to have all of that stuff in there. And I'm not a super expert in this stuff either, but I think that the team that's on there and the feedback, including yours, that we're getting from everyone as we sort of do this in 3 steps this year, I think has been good. So hopefully, when we end the year with what we hope is a full OpenColor IO ACES workflow that's supported in there. If we don't get it right in XB1, there's always XB 2, 3, 4, and 5 to fix things, but we're committed to getting the release after 2020.2 to get it fully correct. And hopefully it will be done in right from the beginning. And if there's bugs or the issues or things missing, that's the whole idea of taking some months to get it, to get user feedback, fix things, and get it really perfect. But, I think it's close, and it's definitely that and custom AVs a huge priority. The other thing that we're working on all of this year, which I think is just important for anyone using Octane to know, is that we do support out of core memories since Octane 4, but it's not as stable as we would like it to be, because we're relying on the operating system to give us pin memory, which is a type of memory you can tell the operating system to reserve for you. And if we don't get it,
what memory was that? Like, could you please slow down?
It's called pinned memory. In other words, it's reserved for you. The problem is that Windows tells us you have 10 gigs of memory, we use it, and Windows takes it away, and then and Octane crashes. So that is a problem.
That's the reason
Yes, that's the reason for everything. So we are fixing that.
Okay, awesome.
And we're also, while we're doing that, we're doing one other thing too, which is we're going to remove any of the geometry limits. So you should be able, like on a 3090, to have many billions of unique primitives in GPU memory. We're going to basically allow you to have much larger scene sizes, even in VRAM and out of core and NVLink. So I don't know if that'll make it by the end of the year with everything, but it's already halfway done. So it's going to definitely make it into, the release cycle probably by the, first half of next year, the first quarter, if not sooner. I mean, our goal would be to try to get it out there by the end of the year too. But, it's a lot of work, but that is the highest priority, is getting the memory management
awesome.
to be redone.
Awesome.
I will say we've done that work partially, believe it or not, on the Mac version. So Octane X for AMD on Mac totally rewrote all of Octane from scratch to run on there. While we were doing that, we tested things that we haven't yet brought over into CUDA, and one of those was improved memory management, improved geometry things. Those things are kind of hidden behind the scenes, but bringing that back over to the CUDA code. And merging them will actually, get a lot of that work out there to more users. I mean, the Mac user base is still fairly small and is very new, but we've tested a lot of things. We've even built things like a CPU denoiser in Octane on Mac that we may bring over to the PC as well. So there's a lot of things there that we also want to do at the end of the year to merge some of the improvements we made when we did the Metal version, and just make them so they're all one. And that way you can even network render between Metal and CUDA devices, things like that. That's also should be in place by the first quarter of next year.
Okay, great. And I read it somewhere, I don't remember which website it is, but like some of the information online saying that the Emperor, like the new Emperor cards actually included an update, like within maybe the driver that supports up to 5 times faster the motion blur calculation, which I believe you also mentioned it, like it's going to be integrated as part of the feature in the upcoming versions, right? Like, do we have any progress in it?
Yeah, every time so I think that the goal is by the end of the year, but the end of the year is going to be an XB1 release for just like 2022 came out in April of this year. The next version after that might be March or April of next year. So for sure, in that release, by the time it's done, it'll be in there. And our goal is to have it hopefully in place by the time that we get to the end of the year and we have the first XB1 of that version. And if you look at our release cycles the last 2 years, we have a pattern. Like we released Octane 2020 in XB1 in November. It was stable in April. I think if you go back to Octane 4, the year before that, we Octane 4 stable came out 2018.1. XB1 came out and then was stable in April. So, probably between the December and April timeframes, we're going to get another release after 2020.2. And it'll include a lot, but I think even the XB1 will have a ton of these features in there. And we're actively working on getting the hardware motion blur support in there now. And you're seeing even in 2020.2, a lot of speed up just from having 3080s and 3090s on hand to optimize. So there's a lot more speed we can get out of the newer cards. And that's one of the problems that we have is that the faster we make Octane or the more features we add to take advantage of newer GPUs, it does slightly make the older 1080s a little bit slower. Not much, but we gain 10% on Ampere and we lose 5% on Pascal possibly. It's okay. But while we're doing that, we're also adding a lot more features. And the reason why is that when you add things like volume displacement and OSL textures and volume, like those things are really designed for newer GPUs. We could do those on the newer GPUs without slowing down Octane or even as we're speeding Octane up. But if you're going back 2 generations, those cards are struggling. They don't have as many registers to handle some of these complex things. And they're a little bit slower, even if you don't use them, but not by much. I mean, Octane Bench in 2020.1 is still pretty much the same speed it was when we, I think when we had V308 or something like that. So, it's just, it goes up and down a little bit, but there's a lot more speed that we're seeing gained on the, on Turing, but even more so on Ampere. So anyone looking to get a new GPU, the 3080s are incredible. I mean, it's 600 Octane Bench now. That's on one card. It's unbelievable that happened. It's really a doubling of speed between, the 2080s and the 3080s. And that's rare. We never really got that before in my recollection between any of the generations. And this is even really without RTX being a factor. It's just even the CUDA cores are significantly faster.
Okay, cool. Like one of the beloved features is the scatter, right? As we all know, Octane can handle incredible amount of geometries if we using the scatter node or the scatter object in Cinema 4D, which is actually based on the scatter node underneath. And the problem is, I personally, I'm not really familiar with this area. Like, is there any fundamental difference between scattered and instance? And if so, why scatter doesn't support motion blur? Is that a technical limitation, or is it going to be resolved somehow in the future?
Yeah, I think Octane Scatter is, as you were pointing out, it's built on top of the core Octane Scatter node, which I think has it should support motion blur, but it's not simple. And I think the way that Ahmed, the Cinema 4D developer of Octane for C4D, he created Octane Scatter. I mean, the way the artists see Octane Scatter in Cinema 4D is through his tool, and he's doing a lot of work to make that tool work. There are certain things that are tricky in the core of Octane that maybe make motion blur hard to do. They make it hard to put it on animated instances. So part of what we're doing is actually taking his work and the core team's work and trying to come up with a newer scatter system. Some of those things are even just showing up as core scatter nodes that are similar to what we have in Cinema 4D, but in the core engine. And the idea is to start with these in small steps and to come up with something at the end of this that allows Ahmed to build everything feature-wise that he needs, that we can even leverage GPU acceleration and even use shaders and other things like that. So that work is sort of in progress. And to be very honest, it's not, we're in the 1/3 of the way done phase to really rebuild all of Octane Scatter. But the idea is that it can work in animated instances and support, things like motion blur a lot better. And we're working on it. And it is something where, there's some limitations that are probably in the core engine that are limiting what Ahmed can do. And we want to eliminate those. And the best way to do that is to actually work with him and kind of combine our efforts here and to build pieces in the core, and that, which will make what he can do in Cinema 4D and probably even take the scatter system in C40 and bring that to all plugins. Just making that more of a core feature is our way of approaching the limitations that we have currently.
Okay, talking about that, which will bring to another question, is that the inconsistent experience among like different plugins. For example, I think
Houdini.
Houdini is actually a huge pain in the ass. But there are actually also some others that I want to talk about. For example, the IPR. Like the IPR, as far as I know, like Octane doesn't have a built-in or uniform IPR that allows the plugins to use, right? All the developers of different plugins, they basically come up with their own solution of the IPR, which is sometimes not very convenient or inconsistent.
Consistent, or yeah. It's a problem that I've been aware of for a while, and I think that I will be honest. Like, I didn't understand how much of a problem it was. But let me before I get into the issue, and let me describe sort of what we have today, which is, yes, every plugin kind of has their own IPR, but that's not exactly true in all cases, because there's always one IPR that is built into Octane. The entire Octane standalone, all of it, is inside of every plugin. And some plugins don't have anything. They have Octane standalone. SketchUp, for example, Unity just pops up the Octane standalone, window. And the problem is Octane standalone as an IPR window is pretty deficient. Octane standalone is great for fast, quick edits. I use it all the time. It's my tool of choice for material editing, but the IPR is nowhere near the level of features that we want to have, for example, compared to what's in the Cinema 4D IPR, which seems to be everyone's favorite IPR. I mean, the number of people that have asked Ahmed and asked me, can you take what's in Cinema 4D and put it in Houdini for the IPR and make that the IPR for all plugins, it's like the number 3 requested feature. I mean, it's in terms of like things to do in the interface. So to that end, I did post this in the GTC talk. I don't know if it's in the in the YouTube snippets, but in the full talk, I talk about the roadmap. And one of the things that I show is that Ahmed has been, just like we're working with him on getting scatter from Cinema 4D into Core and into all the plugins, he's taken 2 of his interface pieces, the IPR window and the node editor in Cinema 4D, and he's taken those out of Cinema 4D, and we have them as modules that we can then plug into Octane standalone. We can plug them into the Core. And the goal is that if that works well and we get it even in standalone, then we can start to make that the official, Octane IPR window. And he can develop that both for Cinema 4D and all the plugins at once, and we can standardize on that. And the node graph is another thing where, the standalone node editor is it's 10 years old. I mean, what Ahmed has built in Cinema 4D himself and is now bringing outside of Cinema 4D so that we can use it elsewhere is, I think most people seem to like that node editor more than a lot of others that we could look at. So we're going to start with those 2 pieces and see if we can at least standardize things on there. And also, as you pointed out, a lot of Octane users don't know what's going on in Octane standalone or in the Core. They just know what's happening in C4D. So a lot of the choices that Ahmed has made for labeling things, for the way materials work, part of bringing some of his interface elements is not just to take the UX, which is great, but also the design ideas and the workflow for the nodes themselves, and express those kind of in, again, the order is, let's take the best of C4D pieces, take some of these into the standalone, which we kind of want anyway, just so that works, and then standardize that across other plugins, which we can do, and not there's 20 other plugins, so it's a bit of work, but we'll certainly start to bring those into things like Unreal or Unity and if we can, into everything. I mean, that I think is sort of a 2 or 3 step process. The IPR being one where, I was looking at Arnold's IPR window, which is really nice. They just added that, that's the kind of thing where, we should have that in every single, DCC plugin, at least, have it pop up and work well. And we did that a long time ago. Probably we're one of the first, but it's been Octane standalone from the very beginning, and that is not the IPR window of choice. So I think C4D has been by far the most popular IPR system. It's got great ideas. He's he's continuously working on it. And I guess the big news is that he is helping to take some of the pieces for the Cinema 4D plugin and make them part of the Core that we can then spread across all plugins.
Is that the new IPR, the so-called Qt5 IPR? Is that based on Qt5? Because I hear that developer of the Houdini plugin has been working on a independent IPR simultaneously. Is that the same thing or a very different thing?
No, very different. So, right now, Ahmed's work with us is just with the core team yet. We haven't talked to the other plugin developers about how or when to bring this in yet, because we kind of need to get it into a shape where, I mean, if you look at the video in the GTC thing, it's very early. It's like Ahmed was surprised I even showed it, but I wanted to tell people, listen, I'm listening to what you guys are asking for. This is where we are at. In full transparency, I've had discussions with Ahmed about taking pieces from C40 and putting them into core. So the process for us is, well, we need to see if we can take these things out of C40 and just get them to work in standalone and just get that to be, integrated in the core, and then work with the various plugin developers to migrate. And some of these things could be just as simple as the IPR window, or maybe the node graph editor, or maybe just, standardizing more on the way C40 expresses materials. And maybe even there we can make further improvements or simplifications. So right now, Wancho's work in Houdini is totally separate from any of this. Okay. I think he's just on his, he's a great developer, and he's, but, to your point, when he also does the Redshift, plugin as well, and uses the Redshift IPR and Arnold. So, and we're all friends. We have a great relationship with the Arnold team. I love the, Panos and Rob and the guys. So, it's a very close community, even the plugin developers. But I do think that there's work that can be done to improve the Houdini plugin. We have a Hydra render delegate for Solaris as well that's just being done independently. But sometime next year, we want to start to think about standardizing on the best, of all what we have in all the plugins. And frankly, a lot of that is coming out of some of the work that we have in the C4D system. And it's possible that Wancho's IPR work in Qt5 might just get us there in the meantime, because there's going to be a period of time before we can actually bring this out to users. This is not something we're going to have by the end of this year, and maybe not even by April. So but it depends. If users desperately need this and some other things are blocking, we can always reprioritize. My goal with Octane since Octane 4 was to get to these 4 or 5 month release cycles where if we're not doing something really that users are missing, we can at least fix that 4 months later. And I think, so if in April we're not in a place where we want to be with the IPR windows, with the UX and key plugins, maybe we'll come up with something and move things around. So that's how I look at the at that. But the biggest part was just Ahmed actually testing whether he could take some of the things from Cinema 4D and take them out of Cinema 4D and put them into a library that could work in the core. And that at least looks like it's going to happen. So that's great. And he's actually done a lot of work, which has helped us then map out this as a real. So
it also
feature.
Means that we can get it away the vertical node graph layout in the standalone and use a horizontal kind of way to view the
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
That's a big pain.
Yes. It's a big pain. I use standalone for many reasons. Historically, when Octane was first out, there was no, 3D Max was the first plugin, but before that, it was just the standalone. So, I used Octane for years just in the standalone, and I still test mostly in it because the first builds that come off in the development branch are all just standalone. Before it goes to the plugin developers, I want to see how things work. So I've just built a workflow right, but it is a pain. It is fast. It's kind of a nice, it's directly, there's no layers between Octane and what you're seeing, but it is also limited, and it's got a lot of old UX things that need to change. There's no timeline per se. There's no history of things. All these things are things that absolutely, we deserve to have a standalone tool exist, and it needs to be better than it is. And I think, the logical thing is to take some of the best of the plugins features that are in things like C4D and bring those over into the core, improve standalone, and then also improve the plugins. Not all DCCs have good node graphs. Even Ahmed has built his own node graph system right within Cinema 4D. And maybe we'll shift to Cinema 4D's node system at some point. But in the meantime, I think it's served us really well that we've had that.
Okay, cool. But we have to move fast to the next question as well.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Any other things? Because I have
a question, and the question is about what's the difference, because it's just a personal question, because my last lessons is expired.
Expired, right?
Expired. Yeah. So I just use the extend the maintenance for the lessons. Yeah, and but now I can't find there's any information in my subscription, so it still seems like expired. So I don't know if So I don't know if there's something wrong. I'm done. So because it is expired, so I can't to use the new GPU VFX things or the Scalps software. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I have one advice which I think is helpful for everyone using Octane. help@otoy.com. We have a great team that supports, that helps you with all of this within 24 hours during business hours. They will work with you to make sure your license is correct and sort everything out. And they're really good. I mean, everyone that I've sent to the support desk on help@otoy.com, usually within 1 or 2 email threads, we can get this sorted out. And it's possible that a PayPal subscription from 2019 or earlier may need to be transferred to the credit card subscription, because the credit card subscription has a different royalty or processing. So we're able to add a few more things. So the difference, for example, is if you're on a monthly PayPal, you only get 1 plugin. If you're on monthly credit card, which is we added last year, the end of last year, then you get all the plugins, you get rendered, you get Evergen, you get everything, because it's just a system that we're able to get the royalties and the monies divided amongst the our third-party developers better, and that's why we switched to that. So that's the main recommendation, is if you're on the PayPal subscription, it's worth it to switch to the credit card one. And I understand that's not an option for many users in China, which is why we're looking to just add Alipay and WeChat to make that simpler.
Yeah, actually, early today, there are still a few people asking me whether do you still support PayPal. Somehow I just became their Octane support unwillingly.
Yes.
So
well, here's the thing. If on a case-by-case basis, yes, we can, you can send a request and use PayPal, but it's definitely not something we want to support at scale. We can't, because PayPal is it's a different cost to us, and it's a different split. And it is something we're trying to move to Stripe. But if you're stuck and there's nothing else you can do, so send an email to help@otoy.com, and if you're on PayPal, we can try to work something out. But I'm hoping that really by the time that we get to the end of this year, we'll at least have another option besides the credit cards that we have now to get the subs. But PayPal is not on the shop page, and it's not something we're actively pushing users to do, because it's a kind of a pain for us. Like, we lose money if we use PayPal and provide more things. But we also want to. Our users are are important to us. So if there's no other choice for now, we can figure something out. But I'm hoping that there's going to be other options by the end of the year that'll be best for everyone.
Everything will be fine. Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, let's say if user have a question or problem, difficulty using the software, is it better to send an email to the help desk, or just make a ticket on the website? Which one is actually better, or you would suggest user to do?
I think using if you're really stuck, the help desk, help@otoy, especially if it's an issue with a license or payment question, that probably is the best place to go. For bugs, you can also send bug reports and file those to anywhere. But I do think that for license questions in particular, that's where help desk is really there to help, because they could do things like reset your unlocks and sort out different currencies and things like that. So I would start with that if you have a license question. For support issues, there's many resources, of course. The forums are where all the developers are present. And there's, of course, I don't know, of course, in China, some of these things just don't exist. I don't think Facebook's an option there. But I do think that, yes, if you have a support ticket, you can also send that to help@otoy. It does, we do have the development support team on the other end of that line to help with, product questions as well. So it's a good place to send, anything that you need help with that isn't available in other places easily, resource-wise.
So, for direct support, you would recommend the help desk, the ticket system, as the main choice, and then for a more broad question to discuss, you would recommend the forum or over email.
Yes.
All right, cool. Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, that's it. I think.
That's it.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. We didn't expect this can be that long. Originally, we thought it's just 10 minutes of a chit chat, but it's almost 2 hours or so. Thank you very much. It's a really a very productive and informative talk and sharing. And but besides, I also want to say that we will probably have more collaborations or close collaborations between Momenta and Otoy early next year. So stay tuned and keep an eye on our websites. We'll probably announce more news later down the line. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jules. And thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
We learned a
It's a
lot.
pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
You.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.